Chapter 16. Jonas. I reached for Alex's foot and leg, as she stood perched above me, eased her down, then without her realizing I maneuvered Alex on her stomach. I pushed up, and laid over her where she couldn't move into another position. I ground my cock into the split of her smooth, glistening tanned ass. I held up my body with my arms as my hard cock pressed warm pre-cum liquid all along her inviting toned ass. I marked her like an animal would. Like she did me with her fingernails on my back. "What are you doing?" she bellowed when she felt my pre-cum. "You're disgusting." "Yeah, but you love it," I said, my mouth pressed on the nape of her neck. The more she tried to move to get away from me, the more I pounded into her with my length, until she laid still and her body met the floor. To anyone looking at us, it would appear Alex had given up. She was tired, I grant you, but Alexandra Blackstone would never give up or give in. Christian must have enjoyed that move. I'm sure he appreciated how I handled Max's wife. He never saw her as anything but a piece of furniture, or a possession to be used then traded to the highest bidder. He knew she was never his. And now she's mine. He never took time to appreciate what a strong, determined woman she was, and had become. Therefore, I gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, as they said. When I placed the head of my cock on her anus, her sacred ring of muscles, Alex twisted and screamed, "Get off of me this instant, you bastard." This wasn't in the script, and perhaps neither was my desire for her like this at first. Nevertheless, I would never hurt her. I had to get her fighting me again, and from all appearances it worked. Alex clawed at me, bit my hand, squirmed trying to turn her body around, but my weight and hands held her down. All her fury and frustrations only proved to ignite my desire, and my cock became full and hard once more. When I was able to place my finger in her opening, I aimed the head of my shaft on her opening, then something took over me and I drove my cock deep inside her. My heart throbbed in my chest because this time I fucked her. Fucked her hard, and she groaned. I moaned from the pleasure of taking the woman I'd dreamed of in my sleep, in my waking hours. This wasn't me making love to Alex, but the opposite of love. It was the wanton pleasure and desire of a man who no one woman could satisfy until now. Once I was inside her body, that animal instinct took hold of me, and I couldn't stop the raw, dirty emotions that consumed my thoughts, that drove my instincts and body to reach an orgasm the only way I could. I pushed deeper inside, pulled out, then drove my hard, relentless cock between her ass, threatening to enter that part of her with it. My cock had become rigid and tough as steel, and exploded once inside her cavity. She screamed, shouted that I was a bastard for doing this. It didn't stop me, because I was inside her now, and I controlled how hard I was, and once I'd gotten past her tight ring, it wasn't as painful as before from what I'd experienced with some women. Soon Alex stopped screaming, calling me names, and began to push back against my stomach, taking me deeper. It was no longer possible for me to go any deeper, and soon our bodies fused. I had thought about stopping and placing the leather ball in her mouth, which would have made for an authentic experience for Christian, but I didn't want to stop because I knew if I had, Alex would have bolted. I had been relentless, driving my cock inside her, hesitating, then working her again while fingering her clit when I pulled her against my chest. I couldn't get any deeper, I'd imagine, when I pulled back, but not pulling my cock out. It would have been too painful had I started over. However, as I held onto her tiny waist when she curled her back to me, and I had a chance to whisper in her ear, I said, "Please, Alex, don't stop now. It's almost over. If I don't follow through with this, then Christian will call in someone else. Pretend I'm Max to get you through whatever bothers you with this situation." However, it wasn't a situation. This was a nightmare that would wake us both up at night one day, and have us wondering in the dark whether Max would find out about us, because after this night, I would never leave Alex alone. Alex had to make every aspect of tonight look real, and I would ensure Christian thought it was indeed real. Christian's kink was getting off seeing me abuse Alex, and I knew that couldn't happen until I'd taken that next step. That's why we had to pretend at first. I pretended that this wasn't me, and Alex probably pretended that she didn't enjoy me fucking her the way I had. I didn't know. I hoped one day she would reveal her thoughts or forgive me. Finally pulling out, I moaned. Alex got to her feet with a strange look in her eyes. Then I went to my knees on the soiled rug that had been witness to me fucking Max's only love, and now she'd become my only love. I placed my head down, my hands behind my back, and kissed her boots when she stood over me. Then she sauntered around naked, holding a pair of handcuffs she expertly placed on my wrists. She reached for her whip, I heard when she cracked it. I felt the heat of the sting when it came down on my ass, which almost brought me to orgasm. She used her flogger intermittingly with her whip on my back muscles, making me hotter than I'd ever been for a woman in my life. My steel cock seeped pre-cum, my body trembled with excitement at the thought of having her once more. Alex strolled in front of me and glanced down, and I gazed up with sadness and longing in my eyes. I tried to hide how much I wanted her again, and eventually would have her, but there was no hiding, especially when she locked eyes with me when I dared to gaze on her naked, claimed body. Claimed by me. Jonas Blackstone. When our role play began after I took Alex and fucked her hard, she said, "Why are you looking at me that way? I'm the master now. You never look at me until I say so." She knew why, and so did I. She had held back her desire for me when I sucked her clit and brought her to orgasm, but I saw the warmth in her eyes and the acceptance of the inevitable. Her voice signaled that she'd become unsure of herself, and if I heard the break, Christian did too. Something had changed, and it wasn't that I'd broken her. Only I could sense what it was. Once Max had divorced her on a whim and anger, she had become mine because she had no other way to be close to Max other than through me. I would protect her as I'd done in the past, and she would be everything to me as the wife of my twin brother. Now, everything had changed between us. Alex had become so much more to me. She stooped and unlocked my handcuffs. I stood, then pulled her in the direction of the bed and pushed her down. She laid there waiting for me, and I didn't disappoint her. I placed my cock on her opening and entered her once more. In that moment we locked eyes because we'd recognized that there was no turning back, and she belonged to me too. Jonas. I had always belonged to Alex. She possessed my mind and soul, but now she was in possession of my body. I knew Alex had been tight and I'd probably hurt her because I didn't control myself, but as I eased inside her and kissed her waiting mouth, I came to realize she hadn't had a man in over a year. Each time I raised my eyes to look at her or placed my mouth on hers, she'd bite me the way she's doing now, but this only turned me on and I suspected it did the same for her. Alex would allow my tongue inside her mouth, but then she'd pull away and turn her head, because we were still worrying about what Max would say or do if he'd ever get hold of this video. We knew Christian would sooner or later make it public one day if we couldn't stop him. I'd been sure Christian had filmed it for his sadistic gratification, or who knows what he'd planned after this night. Selling it to the highest bidder? It was probably like a criminal taking a trophy, or returning to the scene of the crime. And what we all had done was a crime against Max. Why am I worried about what Max will say or do, I thought. He was the one who sent Alex out into this world of unethical, vicious, greedy billionaires, without anyone to look after her. She needed me to take care of her now, and I'm doing so. It may not be what Max had envisioned, but why the fuck do I care? Because he's my twin brother and he took care of me when I couldn't, I rationalized, and he and Alex are my only family, the only two people who have kept me sane. I didn't really protect my brother's most important asset. I introduced her to someone like this monster who's watching our every move. When I submitted to her, my body trembled every time Alex lashed me with her whip on my ass. I ground my teeth because she was especially harsh, but she knew how to hit me without leaving any marks, and I knew why. I knew why she handcuffed me, because I would have jerked off amidst all the pain, because I so enjoyed Alex whipping my ass. The licks I received may have been severe and painful, but Alex had to. I think we both experienced the same sense of betrayal, and that was our way of atonement for our sins. I was because I felt we had betrayed Max by lying together. For feeling something sexual and erotic for each other, therefore we should be punished, I thought. Yet my mind had been confused, and it was telling me it was him who should be punished, because of what he'd done to change Alex and me. Alex had been talking as she'd brought down the whip, and finally she'd broken through my thoughts when I was on the floor thinking about how I could release this cum building up, because of the excitement of being beaten by her. "Have you had enough?" Alex had said. I shook my head, because the more she tortured me the better I felt. "I know you enjoy what I'm doing to you, but you'd better not come," Alex barked out a warning. She didn't have to worry about me coming. I wanted to do that after I've given her an orgasm, and fucking her while she laid on her stomach or on all fours. When Alex became tired of punishing me, she stood in front of me with her legs wide, and I raised my head because her pussy had been carefully shaven. I wished she would allow me to shave her one day. I could see her folds. She opened them with her fingers, and let me see her swollen clit, and I scooted up and in front of her to suck her clit, after inserting my finger in her pussy to see how moist she'd become. She was literally leaking. Placing my mouth covering her clit, the taste and smell of her folds brought pre-cum escaping from the slit on my cock. It was messy, and lots of white fluid leaked on the rug as I peered down wishing I'd had an orgasm. When I was on the floor with my hands behind my back, I threw my head back as she moved forward, my mouth covering her clit, my tongue inside her. I wanted to reach for my penis and jerk it for a few minutes, but all that was going to do was have me coming too soon, because I needed to be inside her to fuck her like Christian had directed me, or he would bring someone in to do the job I'd refused to do. I didn't beg her to take off the handcuffs, because it had become imperative that I make this believable, because I'm sure he could pay one of the crew, or send one of his billionaire friends up to finish the job I started. Therefore, I convinced myself to drag this on longer by encouraging Alex to abuse me. I knew I was going against the script, and there would be repercussions, but Christian didn't interrupt us, and I thought he was enjoying us. With Alex's legs open wide over me, her head back, her hands opening her clit because she won't allow me to touch her now, my tongue explored her and my mouth sucked her hard, and then when she couldn't take any more I brought her to orgasm, and she called out Max's name. I didn't know how to feel, but I did tell her to think she was having sex with Max, because that's the only way she could have made this believable. Then she fell back on the bench in front of the bed, and she was halfway on the bed, and her beautiful ass was still on the bench. I crawled between her legs and lapped up the last bit of cum from her when she reached for my hair then my face. With her eyes closed she'd said, "Fuck me, Max." And she moves up in the bed with her eyes closed, and her breathing accelerating. "Turn around and get on all fours. Now it's your turn to be submissive," I barked. From what little Max had told me, they would interchange roles when having sex. One would submit to the other when they felt like it. It wasn't forced, but at first Max thought he'd wanted to be dominant in bed until he'd met Alex. She'd completely taken over him, and became the dominant one in their playroom. Now I had to wait, because I didn't know if she'd obey me, and if she didn't then I'd have to flog her and put handcuffs on her and then fuck her. Although Christian took my money, he's still in charge, because as long as we were on his ship and away from the shore he was the master of our fate, and unless we could swim for miles when he threw us into the Gulf, then it didn't matter what we wanted. Standing near the bed, I saw an exhausted Alex turn on her stomach and crawl to get a pillow. I'd never seen anything or any woman that beautiful in my life, in the way she'd move in bed. When she stirred up on all fours, I climbed behind her, placed my finger to line up my cock and pushed inside her. We had been going at it for hours, and I didn't think I could get my cock hard enough to fuck her again. She was a woman, and I was a man with my limitations when it came to sex, and that said it all. But when I watched her body, I stroked my cock and I was ready again. I moaned in pleasure when the tip of my length touched her opening. Her tight pussy, the tight feel, took my breath away. I placed my hand and cupped her breasts, pinched one nipple, then drove into her. She didn't cry out, but I didn't expect her to. She wasn't dry now because I'd seen to that, and she had something to do with it as well. It didn't take me long when she pushed back into me, driving me deep, causing me to moan with pleasure. Then I heard a groan, and a tightening around my cock. Alex knew how to use her muscles to bring me to a quick orgasm. One I didn't want, but after all we'd done tonight I had no choice, because this movie had to end sometime even if I didn't want it to. But then the night was just beginning, and this would go on all night, until both or one of us couldn't tolerate what we were doing anymore, and Christian would have to accept our ending. Yet as tired as we found ourselves, we would still have to perform, and we did, because we became two new lovers who were still experimenting with our kinks and our desire for each other, and because of the newness and the nature of relationship, and how we enjoyed the same types of sexual pleasure, there appeared to be no end in sight when it came to us seeking to enjoy each other. Chapter 18. Alex. Turning over and opening my eyes, I felt around for Jonas. I didn't want to wake alone, but for some reason Jonas had slipped out without waking me. It had been an exhausting and demanding night, one I can never forget, even if I tried. Who could forget something life-changing, satisfying sexually, and more terrible than I'd ever imagined? The soiled sheets and bedding had been a reminder of Jonas's sticky cum, and what we'd done on and off those sheets. I'd surrendered everything I thought and felt about Max, our marriage, our special sexual bond. Everything I held for Max had been handed over to Jonas in one glorious, terrifying night. Then I came back to earth. "Oh my God," I murmured. We weren't using protection. Christian had informed me that I couldn't go ashore even to get birth control. And the ship's doctor didn't have any. He had said to me, "What do you need that for?" And I stupidly agreed. If he wasn't going to have sex with me, I'd agreed and forgot all about it. I should have known he'd be up to something nefarious. With Christian, everything he did had a reason. He married me for a reason, and I was naive enough to think I had that much sway over men. How fucking wrong I was. I had power over two men now, and those were the Blackstone brothers and no one else. Sometimes two men are enough, and now they were more than enough for me. But I was one woman with two men who didn't like sharing. However, in this case I'd been placed in a situation where there were three men who wanted me. I knew Christian wanted me too, but the way he wanted me could only come to a bitter end for me. I wished he'd just go away and give me back my life, and let me figure out how to navigate Max and Jonas. I should have known better, I thought, scolding myself for being stupid. I'd never seen all this before with Max, but he was different. He loved me and I loved him. But Christian, he's a young man the likes I'd never known. His needs and wants had been different than what I'd seen with Jonas and Max. I could deal with Maximilian and Jonas's kind, because they did have some respect and feelings for women, rules they'd lived by, but I'd never met anyone like Christian who lived to barter and trade things for whatever he desired. Whether women, cars, companies, yachts, or sexual kinks he wanted to experience and satisfy at any cost. Preferably have women pay the price. When I thought I heard a door open, I turned. "You must be feeling great. I know I got a good night's rest from the show you put on." Then Christian palmed his cock. I closed my eyes for a second. Will he ever give me a minute's rest? I wondered. "Are you admitting you can have an orgasm?" I lashed back. "I'm a man, and a young one at that," he bellowed. I became alarmed, and pulled the covers over my breasts. After I'd fumbled around and found my robe in the bed under a pillow, I placed it on and stepped to the floor. Out of desperation and wanting to defend myself from an out-of-control young, dangerous, and unhinged man, I reached for my whip. The one I'd used on Jonas earlier. When I flicked my wrist and the whip tore across his chest, he glanced at me in surprise. "Do you dare use that on me?" he questioned, eyes blazing. "Before we arrive in Cancun, you will see my whip." And he turned on the balls of his feet, and as quietly as he'd entered my stateroom, he disappeared through a secret panel connecting our rooms. Rushing to get my cell, and trying to raise Jonas on the phone, and to send off a text, Christian returned as quickly as he'd left. I remembered why I'd come here, he said, a smirk tugging on the left side of his mouth. Max is dead. I didn't know what to feel, but I wasn't going to show any emotions where Christian would taunt and abuse me further. How did it happen? I questioned. Max had been thought to be dead more times than I could count, in more ways than there are days in the year. It appeared he went down with the helicopter flying him back to Manhattan. I'd asked him to stay because the weather was treacherous over New York. You know how it is with the change of seasons, but he didn't seem to be put off by that. Max is somewhat of a daredevil, he loves taking chances. You should know. 9 lives, I hear, he said with a smirk. I guess he used all of them up. I assume he was a gambler. He gambled on you. Now look at what he has for all his money and power, a slut who would sleep with any man. A real woman would have jumped overboard. I stared at Christian, fuming and forgetting that I hated him more than I'd loved Max. Christian grabbed my hair and dragged me to the mirror on the panel. You're mine now to do as I wished. And I have so much more in store for a slut like you. And he dropped his hands, and his eyes roamed down my back to my ass, offering me a cynical smile that crawled across his face like a snake. He had been more dangerous than a snake, because he was a man, if he could call himself that. Gripping my whip, I turned and stepped closer to him. You were the one who set this diabolical, dirty, filthy scheme up, and now you want to blame me. Then blame me. I'm tired of making excuses for men like you. You could have refused, but you went along with it, Christian barked, as if he thought that would intimidate me. Well, it didn't, because I knew how ruthless men like him could be. But he proved by far to be the worst I'd ever encountered. When did I ever have the opportunity to refuse you? When? He raised his hands in surrender and chuckled. I'd endured Max taking my children from me a second time, and being used as a pawn by all the men he'd fucked over in business, and some he may have killed to protect his honor, and I didn't doubt he'd committed murder because of me. Max had always thought I was his possession too, as in all the possessions he'd owned, and I forced him to sell them off, and he may have resented me for that. I knew if there was any way Max was alive, and he had been a witness to what Christian had done to humiliate me, Christian wouldn't be long for this world. But therein lies the problem. If he were to see that video, either Jonas or I would be dead. I've lived with and loved Max from the day we locked eyes at his ski lodge, who had been capable of doing unspeakable things, and yet I loved him, revered him, obeyed him, and we had the most unbelievable sex imaginable. And I still loved him with every part of my being, and I don't know what that said about me except, Christian doesn't know who he's fucking with. Are you mad, or do you think you can convince Max if he's alive I would sleep with his brother? Max knew me well enough now to know I'd never willingly lie down with Jonas. However, if anyone analyzed that tape, it was all there. I loved every minute of Jonas making love to me. Fucking me places only Max had been. Who knows that story except you, me, and the steward? The others are dead along with Max. You sold me to the highest bidder. And it appears you and my steward got along beautifully. You had an orgasm, and he had several. You can't prove I enjoyed that man. And what about you? There are words for you, and I won't take the time to trade insults, Christian. Maybe you will. Take a shower, no, better yet, don't. I want you in my cabin in the next few minutes, ready to provide the type of recreation you've been giving to that dead husband of yours, and that man who paid a fortune for one night. I want to experience what makes a cunt like you worth millions for one night.